Thanks for listening to the Nice Podcast. I am available to deliver keynote presentations and workshops for your company or for your conference. Reach out to me, davedelaney.speaks.com, or email me and we can talk. Now on with the show.
Hey there, it's Jason with the Marketing Podcast Network. Real quick, I want to make sure you know that the world's leading B2B Marketing Expo is returning to the Los Angeles Convention Center on March 21st and 22nd. It's high time we got back together to learn, see the latest technologies and solutions, and network, right? Join thousands of marketing professionals just like you to learn from over 250 industry expert speakers, educational masterclasses, and over 300 exhibitors. And this year, your ticket also gets you into the Sales Innovation Expo and the Marketing and Advertising Expo. So it's like 3 conferences in one. It's March 21st and 22nd at the Los Angeles Convention Center. Go to b2bmarketingexpo.us to register. That's b2bmarketingexpo.us. The Marketing Podcast Network is a proud partner of the B2B Marketing Expo for 2023. We'll see you in LA.
Nice.
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 Nice. Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice with Dave Delaney.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Nice Podcast. I am your host, Dave Delaney. I'm thrilled to share my interview today with psychologist, author, public speaker, and business strategist, Liane Davey. Liane is a New York Times bestselling author of You First, Inspire Your Team to Grow Up, Get Along, and Get Stuff Done. You might have seen her articles in the Harvard Business Review. I also recommend that you check out her latest book, The Good Fight. You can find it in all of those normal places. Liane and I spoke about raising empathetic kids, finding balance as introverts, extroverts, and ambiverts, nice versus kind, conflict debt, friction in teams, and much more. And be sure to listen for her tent analogy. It's brilliant. Now, a few quick notes before we jump into the interview. First, I recorded this in January and was learning this software, and I made a big mistake. I accidentally recorded my sound from my computer microphone and not the microphone. So, of course, that's going to make me sound kind of crappy, and I apologize for that. But trust me, Liane's well worth listening to, and her microphone sounded great. The other thing I'd like to mention is I would really appreciate it if you visited friend.nicepodcast.co or just click the link in the description on this episode, and you can share some feedback about who you are, what you do, and that kind of thing in our little survey, and that's going to help me make the show better. I'll even promise to use my actual microphone next time. So with that, I'm going to share our interview now. Thanks for being here. First of all, I want to say welcome and thank you again for agreeing to come on the podcast. I've been really excited to speak with you since our hanging out on the subway not that long ago, it seems.
I know, that was so cool.
That was awesome. So
yeah, that was so cool.
For nice makers listening, Liane and I are both speakers. We both we're going to a speaking event in Toronto, my home and native land, and your home. And we ran into each other on the subway on the way to this event. Like how
having never met each other in person.
That's right.
We recognized each other from social media, which is crazy.
Yes. I love it when social media actually works, when it actually brings the social, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and when we were on the subway, we talked the whole way down to the event, which was a good number of stops. And we spoke a lot about travel and how travel is so important to us and our respective families and things. Obviously these days, not so much, or it's still important, but we're not obviously traveling right now. Tell me a little bit about how that's been going for you and sort of why travel is important for you and your family.
So travel is really central and important to our family. It's it started 5 years ago, or probably more than 5 years ago now, when my husband and I both quit our jobs to start our little consulting firm that we have. And our elder daughter was just finishing up grade 8 and starting high school. And we just really had this moment of realizing that we only had 4 more years as a family of 4, and we better do something with it. So we quit our jobs so we could be more focused on what we wanted to, and started our own firm. And from the get-go, one of the decisions we made is that we would take a sabbatical every August for the entire month of August, and we would do a continent a year with the kids. So we started with Europe, thinking that was the good starter travel, and did a month in Europe. And the next year we did New Zealand and Australia and Fiji. And then we did an Asian trip, and then the last trip was to South America, Argentina, Chile, Peru, and Brazil. And what we're trying to do with that is, first of all, travel as opposed to being tourists. So as much as possible, we're staying in Airbnbs, we're staying in places where we have to go to the grocery store, we have to navigate the public transportation system, and we're trying to create empathy in, we're trying to raise nice kids who understand their privilege, kids who see through travel both the things they have so much in common with people around the world, and the ways in which their lives are so different from others, and then also just to have time together. And it's been absolutely phenomenal. It's just been the best gift, and I think our kids are more worldly, more connected, and so when things happen in the world, they have a context to understand it through. And it's not perfect by any stretch. Traveling as a wealthy white family does not exactly help you understand famine in Africa, but but at least a little more so than going to all-inclusive 5-star resorts in the Caribbean, which doesn't give you much of a sense of anything. So it's just been really important to us. And then, of course, COVID happens, and there are many trips that we have missed. But in some ways, the stark contrast and the absence of something like that is just as useful, right? Because doing without is good for us, and changing it up and learning how to be agile and create fun experiences that don't require travel has been a good learning, just as much of a good learning this year as travel has. So yeah, it's been such an interesting time to reflect on the meaning of travel in our world.
And what are some ways that you have been replacing travel? What are some ways that you've been are you homeschooling your kids, or are they at what's the status for you right now?
Yeah, so the status in Toronto at the moment, so I have one in first year university at McGill, and so she's home at the moment, still hasn't come back after they're in a big lockdown there in Quebec at the moment, so she's home at the moment, but she's been living in residence at school, and the other is in grade 9, and she's at high school, and so they've been toggling back and forth. So they had a while where they were at school mornings every other day, so she's getting a bit, but at the moment we're locked down. And so at the moment we have all 4 of us in the house. It's a very small downtown Toronto house to have 4 people in, but it's okay. I think it's made all of us a bit more introverted. So we spend a lot of time in our own little spots in the very small house. But then when we have, dinner together, or there's something that captures our attention, it's all the nicer, right? It's good.
Do you consider yourself more introverted, extroverted?
The world would think that I'm a flaming extrovert. I seem to be. I love people. I get a lot of energy from people. Over my life, I'm starting to realize that I am certainly an ambivert. You don't write 3 books and write a blog for many years and all those sorts of things if you aren't equally as motivated inside your head and in the world of ideas. And I'm finding I've had a few big epiphanies over the last 10 months. And one of them is that I adore people, but my strong preference is people one at a time. And if I can have a long, luxurious walk or talk with one person, that's really my favorite thing. And as this whole Zoom cocktail party thing has been happening, it's just not my favorite version of myself. So, I'm certainly a people person. I get a lot of energy from people, but I think in a much less extroverted way than I might have thought about myself for many years, and much more needing the balance of some time inside my head as well. So that's been something that I was starting to figure out before, but COVID has certainly made that very, very clear to me.
That's something that hits home for me greatly. Actually, I feel the similar sort of way, and have always considered myself more of an extrovert, ambivert. I mean, I've organized events and cocktail events and things like that where I need to be on, and I do enjoy that interaction with lots of people and speaking. You're a great speaker, and so like being just attacked by the mob after knocking out a keynote, it feels great. And then after you get back to your hotel room and you're like, but I think what you said actually, quite resonates with me. My wife identifies as definitely more of an introvert. She's a school teacher. She gets home, on a normal time. She gets home, she's exhausted. I work from home. And so, and we have 2 teenagers who don't, really want to know anything. They don't want to talk to me ever again, or at least for another 5 maybe years or something. Yeah. Man, for parents out there with younger kids, cherish the time with them when they're little, because man, the teenagers. But
so the big one for me has come out the other side, and that's even better for me. So, little kids are a lot of work, and sometimes not. Sometimes they're entertaining, but they're not interesting in the same way. Now that the almost 19-year-old has kind of come back out the other side, that to me is the big payoff.
Yes.
So interesting. Some of, things like the investment in that travel, I'm now seeing the benefits of that come out. So hang in there. I get the moody middle phase of the teen years, but I think the great reward is coming.
Yeah, we're going to keep them, we think.
Yeah, well, at this point, major sunk cost.
You're right about that.
The thought of doing it again is really unappealing.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, for sure. And it's interesting too, though, because I've gone through a period of feeling quite lonely, and I've been reading a lot and talked to a therapist a couple times. And have another appointment. I'm looking forward to that. And have explored sort of loneliness. I've read a great podcast a while back from Brene Brown about that, and the fact that you can be surrounded by the people you love and still feel lonely, and that's okay.
Oh yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, I relate to it, right? And I think especially with teenagers, right? Because they can be right up in your face and driving you crazy on the one hand, but there can so often feel like there's no connection. They don't even see that you're there. It's really about meeting their needs, and you just realize that they don't even understand or comprehend the fact that you have needs which they are not meeting. So that is deeply lonely sometimes, and it's really it's really hard to come to terms with being lonely in a full house, but it exists. Loneliness in a full house exists, and in some ways is more profound and more dark than loneliness in an empty house, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's weird. I was talking to someone the other day, and I was saying how the world has really turned where I wrote a lot and studied a lot about introverts because, as a host of events, networking events and things, I want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable. And I understand that as an introvert, sometimes it's just a matter of setting a goal of going to an event for 20 minutes and speaking to one person. And then once you've done that, you can leave. And then maybe trying to increase that a little bit the next time you go to an event, but give yourself permission to leave after you've done like that small task, which may feel like a big task depending on how you are on that level. But it's interesting. Do you feel that organizational leaders, companies are also feeling this loneliness now that they're not able to interact with their team members in person?
It's interesting. At the start of the pandemic, I found it went the other way. All of a sudden, we were seeing people we'd worked with for many years, but we were seeing them in their homes, and there was this intimacy that came, this connection that came from like, wow, or the big powerful male executive who all of a sudden his kid was hanging off his arm, and all of a sudden I felt this solidarity with him, like, oh, you too, and so I think at first there was this greater sense of connection, of seeing people and understanding people more holistically than we ever had before, and that lasted a little while, and then we got into this efficiency mode of, okay, well, we've all got to figure this out and we've got to get back to work, and the Zoom calls or WebExes or whatever they were became so much task oriented. And so now what I find is, I'm not sure I would call it loneliness per se, but I think we just feel really disconnected from one another. We're each just trying to cope with massive workloads in very inefficient circumstances while homeschooling kids, while, et cetera, et cetera. And what's been lost is there's no casual connection. I find I'm constantly, when I'm doing sessions, I'm stopping and encouraging people to do things like, okay, we're going to take a break for 15 minutes, leave your camera on, and don't worry about muting your microphone. That's fine. But then, when you get up, go do whatever you have to do. But if you come back a few minutes early and your camera is on and somebody else has come back early, you may chat about, did you watch Bridgerton or whatever else.
Right.
And every time I've done that, done either an icebreaker exercise, done little breakout rooms, or had this sort of camera on during the break, people that's what they thank me for at the end of the session. Thank you. I feel like we haven't just had that experience like when you are working in a room together and people come into a room over about 5 minutes and they have a little bit of casual conversation before the meeting starts, and on a break, people some stay in the room, some go to the washroom.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we made some good progress at the beginning with this greater intimacy, and everyone was just more comfortable saying, I'm so stressed, I'm barely coping. And so we got this much better human connection for a phase. And then when we got back into this productivity mode, I think we've kind of we've lost some of the progress and we've gone the other way. And I mourn for that, because I think we need to keep up some of that authenticity that we got at first.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great feedback. And it's something that every, manager or leader of an organization should be considering in the Zoom calls that they have or in these scheduled. Yeah, is saving some of that extra time for the water cooler, the virtual water cooler conversations that are definitely missing.
Yeah, and when you put it in, it's just so nice. And it's not until you do it that you realize you've been missing it. You're like, oh, that was so nice. I hadn't heard how your holiday was, or who's right, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think making sure you have that time in there. And there's something about the video call format that just makes it feel very efficient, and that we're supposed to be focused and we're supposed to be working. And we just know from the social etiquette of a meeting room that it's okay that we chat for a bit. We don't sit in silence in a meeting room waiting until everyone is there, and then as soon as everyone's there, we dive into the agenda. But that's what we do when we're in a Zoom room.
That's true. And then we suspect, we wonder who's not wearing pants.
Exactly.
There's always someone.
I've been in leggings for like 10 months. So
my wife Heather. When we started podcasting in 2005, we did a parenting podcast for 3 years back in the day, and I'm quite certain we coined the term pantless podcasting.
I love it. I love it. Well, I just have found that, and I have like all manner of fancy tops. I can do that COVID mullet thing really, really well. But I have not been able to change out of the leggings or my fuzzy slippers. So it's funny, I have a studio set up downstairs for keynotes with the fancy camera and the ring lights and all of that. And even my fancy high price keynotes, I've still had the bunny slippers on the bottom. Thankfully they aren't visible, but now your audience knows what's actually happening from the ankle down.
The secret sauce.
Yeah, exactly.
The lucky bunny slippers. Hey, I have a question. So what is the nicest thing that someone has done for you recently?
it would be good if I had a ready answer to that, wouldn't it?
No. Take your time. Take your time.
Nice.
I always like to ask this. It's always interesting to hear the different answers. So.
One of the things that I really appreciate is we've been bemoaning teenagers, but my 14-year-old a few times, not just a few times, kind of regularly over COVID, every once in a while will sort of wander down, see that I'm not, on a call or something like that. And she'll say, do you want to just walk out to the cafe? And it was funny because over our last break, she actually admitted that she's doing that for my mental health.
Oh, wow.
That I'm working too much and I need to get out of the house. So it's very deliberate on her part. And so she said, I make it sound like I need to get out of the house, but really and so she's doing it for myself and for my husband and just finding little excuses. And so she actually admitted, she's like, it was very funny. I was killing myself laughing. She said, Dad, last week when I said, could you take me to the drugstore because I needed shampoo? She's like, I didn't need shampoo. Did you look in the bottom drawer? I have a full shampoo in the bottom drawer. I just knew you needed out of the house. And
wow.
So, but here's a sacrilegious thing on the Nice podcast, which is that my goals in my life are not to use nice as my guiding principle, because I find when I try and be nice, and because I'm somebody who my primary work is around the importance of conflict.
Yes.
I find if I think about nice, it sends me in a bad direction. I become quite passive. I only say things that are nice and that sort of thing. So the word I use is kind. So when you asked the question at first, I was thinking about what's something very kind that someone has done for you recently. And as soon as I ask it of myself that way, I don't get my daughter Mac, getting me out of the house, although that probably is kind as well. But I go to things that are, what was something that someone did that was courageous, told me something I needed to hear. So I have one friend, her name is Tammy, and she's a brilliant speaker and leadership development guru and author, and she's amazing. And, she's the one who recently, she gave me some feedback on a new online course that I'm working on. And, it was so to the point. It was something I really needed to hear, not necessarily something I wanted to hear. And she nails kind because she just knows that this is something that I need to hear that most other people wouldn't tell me. So that's kind of a fun provocation for your audience is, asking not only what's something nice that someone has done, but I think there's this other valuable piece that if we push ourselves, yes, nice, but beyond nice to kind, sometimes we'll do the harder things that in the moment might not feel nice, but ultimately contribute and build trust and really create very strong relationships. So the strongest relationships I have are probably not with people who've been nice to me. They're with people who've been kind to me in a more kind of profound way. I know that's sacrilegious on the Nice podcast, but just food for thought.
No, it is. It is helpful, and it is something I've thought a lot about. I mean, for me, it's not about always being nice. Like kindness, I believe, is part of being nice, but I think also being nice to yourself means also being honest and sometimes hard on yourself in a positive way. And giving that nice feedback on your online course is nice because it's kind, because it has that in there, but also having some constructive criticism in there to make sure that that's honest, that honest feedback. So yeah, but I like where you're going with that. And I love the fact that Mac took you for a drive. I think that's
she's so good.
That's yeah. So, and you're a psychologist, right?
Yeah. She has two psychologists for parents, poor kid.
So I didn't know your husband was a psychologist as well.
Yeah, deadly.
Oh my gosh. But that's amazing. So obviously what's the line? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? I guess she's your future family psychologist. Is that right?
Well, it's really funny because the kids, I think, are both wired with real intuition, with really impressive psychological thinking. And at least the first one, the apple might have might not have fallen far from the tree, but she's trying to roll as fast as she can away from the tree. So she's she's got all of the capability and the insight. She's trying very hard not to be like her parents, and has, insisted on not taking Psych 100 in first year and things like that. So she's trying very hard, but I think both of them are quite skilled, and maybe someday, once they aren't trying to be so different from their parents, they'll come back to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And and I think picking up and running with empathy, in the sense that that travel that we began speaking about, right? I think, for me personally, my wife and I met. She's from the States. She's from Tennessee, and we live in Nashville. And of course, I'm from Toronto. But we met in Ireland backpacking.
Oh, cool!
And we lived in Ireland and Scotland, and we backpacked Italy, hitchhiking for 3 months, lived in a tent, and we're amazing. Yeah, so we've done a lot of that travel, and part of raising our kids in the States. And especially as a Canadian, it's not like we don't know what's going on south of the border. It's kind of hard not to hear from your noisy neighbor.
Yeah.
But part of that, I think, part of the challenge here is that, mass media is so obsessed with the U.S. and maybe more so these days, and maybe with good reason. Probably with good reason these days. But, and so I wanted to make sure that our kids learn about other places in the world, and that they're aware of, not just aware, but that they actually go to other places, right? Our kids' friends have never left Tennessee, many of them, or at least never left the country. Not even to Canada or to Mexico. I mean, when I tell people that it's a 12-hour drive from Toronto, from Nashville to Toronto, they're flabbergasted. They're, really? It's that close? Like, I had no idea. It's just a 12-hour drive? That's not that bad. So, that was part of the thinking with taking our kids and teaching them about the world. And so, we've had
the coolest one. I don't know what your favorite. My favorite so far has been, we went to Angkor Wat in Thailand. In Cambodia. Okay. And this was the coolest one for me, because of course we learn about civilization in Western civilization, right? Like the great civilizations were Greece and Rome, and so you go to Angkor Wat and you realize that 1,000 years ago, Angkor Wat had 1 million people when London had 10,000. And you learn the marvels and the engineering of Angkor Wat. And so the first lesson is like, oh, wow, there were very sophisticated people in places other than the West. And that is super important. But the other thing, if you think about the US today, that was really valuable is Cambodia now is so poor, so war-torn, landmines everywhere still in the ground. And it's really good to show your kids that great civilizations are not a given, and they're not eternal. And so don't you believe that this democracy that we have right now is a God-given right, that it's always going to be here, that, right? Don't take this for granted. And so that was my favorite place I've been to teach a lesson that I think, like, literally today is relevant. I think because most of us have lived this sort of post-war period in North America, we just take our lifestyle for granted. We take democracy for granted. We take peace, at least on our own soil, for granted. And you look at these places and you go, oh yeah, just so you know, it's fragile. And, such an important lesson in 2021. Definitely.
Yeah. I had that realization. So during 9/11, I'm in Toronto, and when 9/11 happened, or was happening, it wasn't really clear where something was going to happen next, or if something was going to happen next. And there were certainly a few next that happened. And in Canada, of course, when we're in Toronto, that would, we weren't sure something might happen in Canada. Something might happen really close to home. We all have friends in the States and so forth. So, there was obviously, everybody was, going crazy with it. And my mom calls me about an hour or two after the last plane went down, and it was clear that the attack was over. Like there wasn't going to be anything else. And my mom calls me And my mom's British, and she's freaking out about it all. And with good reason, of course. But I'm like trying to calm her, saying, Mom, it's not happening here. It's not happening in Canada. It's not happening in Toronto. Like everything, it seems to be over. Like, calm down. You're acting kind of irrational because it's not going to happen here. Like, it's over. And my mom says, Dave, I grew up during the Blitz.
Yeah.
And I was floored. I was like, oh gosh, I never even really thought about that. I guess I never knew that I never really put two and two together.
Yeah,
but
didn't think about it. Yeah.
She was playing in the rubble of, Nazis blowing up London. And so it was a real like wake up call for me that way.
Exactly. It is not a given. It is just not a given. And we treat it as if it is, right? And it's not.
Right.
So, all of these things, I think, we were in Argentina. The day we landed in Argentina was the day they devalued the currency by 25%. And so we were there for 4 days. And the final day, the protesters took to the streets, tens of thousands of protesters. And we're in a cab going to the airport with the kids. And it was just great to be able to talk about what is currency, and money isn't real, and money can, change. And so what you could have afforded at the grocery store yesterday is now 25% different today, and could be, much different again tomorrow. And like just all these things that, and of course the problem is I'm trying to understand it because I'm so ignorant and naive. I'm trying to be an hour ahead of what I tell the kids, so important. And then it just provides great context when you come. So my work is primarily working with executive teams and top leaders and trying to create empathy in them. And so it provides great context for that work when you see some of the strength of humans is good to see, the resilience of people. Cambodia certainly will teach you that. Vietnam was an amazing place for understanding the resilience of humans. But then at the same time, how fragile the systems that keep us cooperating with one another can be sometimes.
And we've brought up empathy a number of times, and I think it's something that is just so key in just the future of humanity.
Yes, everything.
Something so small, just that small little tiny thing, humanity.
Yeah.
But what are some ways, and you've written about and talk a lot about conflict and conflict debt. Let's talk a little bit about that and how that might apply to empathy in leaders.
Yeah, so conflict debt is just this idea I coined to try and help people understand that conflict isn't the enemy, conflict debt is the enemy. So letting conflicts pile up, so they poison relationships, they stall progress, right? So this idea, just like we have credit card debt and we understand that credit card debt can really take us under, so can getting in debt on, a conversation I really should have had, some feedback I should have given, a decision I really needed to make, and I've been avoiding it, all those sorts of things. And so the way that I help people through it is, so you'll like this, the section of my book called Conflict Strategies for Nice People,
right.
To help them understand that really great and productive conflict is conflict that comes as allies. And so empathy is the absolute key to it. So we're going to have tension with one another because we have different roles where we bring different things. We represent or advocate for different stakeholders, right? We are obliged to put tension on a discussion, but understanding that tension is valuable, is good, is okay, but empathizing with the fact that, and the guy across the table is going to put tension on my perspective because he has different expertise. She's representing a different stakeholder. They're right. Mm-hmm. They're fulfilling their obligation to the organization by thinking differently than I'm thinking. So we do an exercise where we go around on a team and we help everyone call out, okay, what is unique about your role? What do you bring that other roles don't bring? Who are you advocating for? What is the tension you're obliged? And just by creating, and I have to tell you, I was doing a workshop on this with a very large, well-known high-tech company, mm-hmm. and it was with their recruiters from all around the world. And we were having them do this, and we were saying, okay, you're the recruiter. Now I want you to think about who are the other stakeholders And so they started talking about the compensation people. And when they were talking about the compensation people, boy, were they not nice. Not nice at all. Because as the recruiters, they're, the talent standards of this company are ridiculously high. And so they're scouring the world to find people that live up to these standards. And when they find them, obviously these people want a lot of money. And the comp people are saying, you can't have that much money. That would, and so they have a lot of pent up frustration and a lot of not nice thoughts about these people. So we started doing this exercise. Okay, well, what's your unique value? What do you bring? And they're like, well, we see talent and potential in people that, yeah, okay, great. And we get all of those kinds of things. What's the tension you need to put on things? Well, we need to fight for the absolute best person. Great. Okay. What about the comp people? What's their unique? And the funny thing is it took them quite a while to even be able to answer that question. Like, well, you mean they bring something to the equation? And they're like, well, I guess part of what they're doing is they're thinking about the internal equity of the pay system. They're trying to make sure pay has a motivating effect on people. And yeah, so who are some of their stakeholders? And they said, well, I guess their stakeholders are kind of all the existing employees, because if we, start, giving the farm to these new prospects, the people who've been here since the beginning it's going to be really unfair. Yeah. Oh, interesting. So they're, protecting the fairness of the company's systems. And as soon as they could get to there, it was very funny because they were like, yeah. Wow, we just thought they were jerks. And now you're telling me that they're, protecting all. And so that empathy, there's still going to be tension between the recruiters and the comp people. And that's a good, healthy tension, because we want those recruiters really pushing to get the absolute best people into the organization. And we want the comp people really tugging on that to say, how do we get them within the framework that allows us to feel good and look everyone who's been here for 20 years in the eye and say, you're not being penalized because you got in early. And so conflict coming from a base in empathy actually just feels like problem solving. It doesn't really feel like conflict at all. And that's where miracles happen.
Yeah, no, I love that.
Have that empathy and understand that the whole point. So what I talk about is the difference between that kind of conflict I call productive tension. So we're pulling, and if you can imagine pulling, so I talk about it with, spreading out a tarp over a tent. So if you imagine, the stakeholders are sleeping inside a tent and you're trying to spread the rain fly, and everybody's pulling a rope in a different direction, but all with the goal that tarp gets really tight so that the rain runs off of it, so that you get it kind of centered over the tent so that no water gets in. And if you can picture that and understand that the tension that you're putting on each of those ropes creates growth, it stretches your resources, it creates coverage, versus what we normally do, which is we engage in conflict as friction. And friction wears us down, makes us tired, exhausts us, makes the solution less effective. So what we're looking for is to have empathy that allows us to create as much healthy teams, great teams have as much tension as possible and as little friction. And empathy is really the linchpin to all of that.
That's brilliant. And I love the vision of that tent. And I'm actually curious where you see either communication breaking down or where communication can be improved by those who are pulling those ropes from either side of the tent, not realizing that if they were to pull them in the correct directions together at the same time, they would accomplish that goal. But instead, if they're not communicating together, they could be pulling those ropes in all sorts of different directions, not allowing that tent to rise the way it should.
Yeah, the communication breaks down in a few places. So one, if you think of any given decision as a TARP, which is what we do when we do this exercise, it's incredible how often there's nobody who owns the TARP. And you're like,
Right.
whose decision is this? Who gets to make the call? Who's watching from above to see that this thing is actually, over the tent, as opposed to pulled way off to one side so that everybody on one side's getting wet?
Right.
So that's the first thing. So there's a huge breakdown in communication when we think that multiple people can own a decision, or where we don't take the time to make sure a single person does own it. That's the first thing.
Okay.
Then when there's not a lot of feedback from that leader or from one another to say, hey, you're pulling too hard, or you've just yanked on your rope 3 times and this other person hasn't even budged yet, hasn't, right? And in a conversation, that means you've put your thoughts in 3 times and there's still 3 people in the room who haven't spoken for the first time yet. So feedback is another, if we don't have it, if we don't have the feedback around. The other thing is, there's a communication breakdown when we don't understand that there's a lot of different people inside the tent that are going to get wet if we don't do this right. So understanding that your stakeholder is probably not the only stakeholder. Even if you think about something like customers, somebody will say, well, we're all here for the customer. We're a customer-centric company, right? I'll say that's nice, but you probably each are thinking about completely different customers. So we work with a lot of high-tech Silicon Valley companies, and some people in the room are really pulling on their rope super hard, thinking about the buyer, right? So they're thinking about the tech company that's going to buy their widget. And somebody else is thinking about the user and that person who's going to be using the software or using the hardware. Well, those are completely different perspectives. And what the buyer wants versus what the user wants are often quite misaligned. Right. And so, even just communicating about different stakeholders and how their stake is different. So there's just so many opportunities where once we communicate better about who's in the tent, like what's our purpose here? What are we trying to do? Who owns the tarp? Who gets to make the call? What's each of our roles and what rope are we pulling on? Are we each pulling about the right amount? And then you can get into more sophisticated ideas like, is there communication about, when the winds change? Are we hearing about, okay, well, there's a certain thing that's changing in the environment that means we need to move the tarp. It means that, we need some perspectives here to pull a little harder, and we're going to compromise and leave some slack on a couple of these things knowingly, because right now we can't prioritize that. So you can use the concept and the exercise to get to some pretty sophisticated things. But at the base level, just this empathy of understanding that no one else is pulling the same rope as me, and me pulling my rope harder and harder cannot make a better decision. Only by kind of optimizing, getting similar tension on each of these different ropes can we make a great call.
I love that in You First, one of your books, Inspire Your Team to Grow Up, Get Along, and Get Stuff Done. You talked about these pathologies. Can you talk a little bit about those? I love the name Bleeding Back Teams. I thought was just brilliant. I love that one specifically, but they're all really good. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, my favorite thing in You First was, at the time, Mac was taking art classes, and her art teacher was a former Disney animator.
Whoa,
so
wow.
Super talented.
Nice.
And and so I just said, hey, any chance you're willing to do some illustrations for my book? And so all the illustrations in the book are custom and done by her.
That's great.
And that bleeding back one is so awesome, because it's a person walking away from another person at a water cooler, and the person has a bunch of knives in their back. And my favorite thing is, just because Peggy and I were having fun and being cheeky about it, in each of the illustrations, there's one of those motivational teamwork posters on the wall. So I think that particular one, I think there's the rowers or something on the wall, which is, you don't notice it the first time around, but then you see it and you're like, because of course that's what happens, right? We put all this great, rowers and teamwork posters on the wall, and then we stab each other in the back. So Bleeding Back Team is and it's a fitting one that you ask about as two Canadians talking to one another, because that's the kind of team that the pathology is really about, passive aggressiveness. And so the knife is in the back, not the front. And so much when we get into conflict debt, it's often because we are passive aggressive about things. So we gossip about it, we whisper about it, we hold grudges, we resent. And yet we don't ever bring the issue into the open where the person could actually do something differently or make it better. So that bleeding back team is, and in Canada, what I've surveyed in Canada and the US, and in Canada, that's the most common toxic team and a big, big problem. And again, we go back to this nice issue. And part of it is that people misinterpret what nice means. And so they get that sort of grandma, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And so they won't say it to people's faces, but the grudge hangs on, and so they tend to get very passive aggressive. So yeah, that's one of my, when I say favorite toxic teams, of course I mean least favorite, but it's sure common around here.
That's amazing.
And Minnesota, the Minnesotan, they call it Minnesota nice, and,
right.
It's a very similar phenomenon.
That's funny. It's similar in the South to there is a line that perhaps you've heard in the South that is especially said by more women than men, which is bless her heart.
That's a great passive aggressive line. In Canada, our word is interesting.
Yes.
And we say interesting when we totally disagree, right? We're like, interesting. We're like, you're full of crap, or what the hell are you thinking? That we use interesting for that. So
I wish people
knew that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I wish people here had said interesting when I moved here like 13 years ago, because I would have understood. Otherwise, instead, I think I had my heart blessed like hundreds of times before I was like, oh, wait a minute. And then you start thinking, like, who was blessing my heart? Oh, man. That hurts.
It's funny how we have all these euphemisms for, and that's conflict at, right?
Yeah.
It's we have these euphemisms instead of actually telling you what would be very kind for someone to tell you. Okay, just so you know, in Nashville is how we do it.
Yeah.
That one person who took you aside and was kind enough to tell you that is probably someone you trust till your dying day, right? They were willing to do that for you.
For sure. Okay, so let's do some. I want to be respectful of your time here, so I want to do some lightning round questions. Are you ready?
Lightning round.
No stress.
Yeah. Maybe. But
no pressure. I'll try to be nice, as they say. Okay, so who is someone that was especially nice to you in your career?
A mentor that named Terry, who I met my very first day of work as a grown-up, and she was so nice and kind and everything else, all the good things, because she was, I don't even know how much older than me she is. She's 20 years for sure older than me, I think. And she just believed in me from the get-go. And anytime anybody kind of looked at me like I was young and who was I to be in this situation, she would just say something that showed them that she had complete confidence in me and therefore they should too. And wow, you don't get something more valuable in life than somebody who just loans you their credibility.
That's brilliant. And nice makers listening, make sure that you consider that for yourself. Maybe you could be that person to support that newbie on your team. All right. Complete this sentence. Nice guys and gals finish.
Nice guys and gals finish what matters.
And I think there's some,
right? It's like, it's not finishing for the sake of finishing. It's finishing the things that matter and letting go of the things that don't. And I think nice makers know the difference.
I love that. What's a nice book you recommend to nice makers listening?
Oh, a nice book. Well, you mentioned Brené Brown earlier. I'm like the ultimate fangirl of Brené Brown, so Dare to Lead or things like that. I really, I think her work is so profound and so important. And given that my book is not nice at all, it doesn't qualify. So I'm going to go with Brené Brown.
It's interesting with Brené Brown too, because is it the fact that she is just so sincere and honest in how she shares what she learns, and that and writes for anyone to really consume and understand, but that also she does, a lot of the research as well.
Yeah, I think she is this totally rare, incredible thing I'm constantly trying to emulate, which is like razor smart, definitely schooled in evidence and curious and always trying to understand what's true, plus completely willing to be vulnerable, plus hilarious, plus, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh God, to just be 1/10 of her awesomeness. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a wow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right about that. All right. How is Liane nice to herself?
Oh, okay, that's a good one. I'm working really, really, really hard on that.
Uh-huh.
So I've taken up bullet journaling for the last couple of years, and bullet journaling is the nicest thing. So Leanne's biggest problem is I get a noisy mind, and my noisy mind is not always nice. And so taking up bullet journaling and learning how to create a receptacle for the thoughts rushing around in my brain so that they quiet down a bit, and then using that space to be more mindful and learning meditation and things like that. So I would say of all the habits, bullet journaling has been the nicest thing I've ever done for myself.
That's great. And actually, I was going to ask you, and you brought that up with meditation and mindfulness. Is that something that you're practicing, something you've been dabbling with, or what are your thoughts
so I have been dabbling with it for a little while. And so starting just the end of 2020, I've been doing it daily and really working on it. And, part of that is just sort of being a 48, 49-year-old female. And just like the hormones are really ridiculous. And all of a sudden I'll start crying and I'm like, what am I crying for? And so it's been super important as a way to say, I don't want to take drugs. I want to first try to teach myself how to be more mindful of where I'm at, to not judge these kinds of feelings or hormones or things that are happening to me, but learn how to kind of let them pass through and be like, fascinating. I'm crying at the dinner table. Look at that. And like, let it go by. So, it's been something that I'm getting more serious about, because I do think I need to be nice to myself in that way. And that, I am seeing some really good benefits of it.
Yeah. I've been doing it for about a year and
how's it working? What are you finding?
It's great. I use, Sam Harris's app, Waking Up.
Okay.
And I had this revelation at one point because I was kind of early on. I was doing one of his exercises, and he said that instead of like, it was early on, but it was instead of like, because things are going to come in your head as you're trying to meditate. It's a given, and you can be like the best meditator in the world, and it's still going to happen. Right. So that's okay. But I would get frustrated with myself and I would quit or whatever. And what I learned in doing it, and I had this sort of revelation, is that no, you're supposed to play it out. Like play that scene out in your head. And so I started accepting these scenarios or situations or whatever these ideas were that I was daydreaming about or were popping into my head. And I would just let them play out. And as soon as they played out, they would end.
Exactly.
And I was like, oh, they do, like they end. Just give it a couple minutes or 30 seconds and that little scenario is going to end. And then you can just get back to like focusing on whatever. And it's cool.
Yeah. It's so good. I found Netflix has just released the Headspace guys have done a Netflix series, and it's really accessible and good for getting started. So if anybody's thinking, maybe I'll try this out, that's another great way, if you have a Netflix subscription, to check out the Headspace series. It's really good.
Yeah, I've been meaning to look at that. And by the way, as far as the hormones go, I'm 48, and I like Mark Maron. I like a lot of comedy, but I like Mark Maron stuff. And I remember Mark Maron was talking once on his podcast, WTF, and he'd mentioned, and he's just, I think he's just over 50. A few years maybe over 50, but at the time he said, like, as soon as he turned 45 or something, he was like watching a Cottonelle ad, and the kittens, he started weeping at the cute little kittens. And I remember laughing my head off going, oh my God, I'm the same way. Like I'll be watching something and I'll suddenly find like I'm weeping. I'm like, what the hell? Like my wife, Heather, will look at me like, whoa, why are you so emotional? So yeah, I'm even getting a little weepy confessing myself. Yeah. Funny.
I know. But you know what? That, to me, that's where we're at. And talk about nice, right? Nice makers make space for humanity, for what's real. It's like, yeah, for me, it's not Cottonelle. This is even more stupid because I am not a sports kind of person. But I think men desperately need these emotional outlets as much as women. And so if you watch any major league sports broadcast, it's worse than a Hallmark Christmas special. Like they are so sappy. And I find when I watch sports, I cry. I'm like, why are you don't even like this sport? You don't know these people, but I'll cry. So, whatever, whether it's Cottonelle ad or I don't know, the Super Bowl, whatever it is, it's, we're humans. It's how we're wired. It's okay.
That's right. Okay, last question. If you had a billboard, what would it say?
Get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Ooh, I like that. That's great. Liane, how can people get a hold of you and learn more about all of your amazing work, your books, your presentations, your consulting and coaching?
The easiest way, and hopefully we can put a link in the notes because
we will.
It's easy except for the spelling. So lianedavey.com, which both of those names are hard to spell because it's Liane with an I, not the Tennessee version, but Liane and Davey. So lianedavey.com, and you'll see there's about 500 articles on the blog there. You can search around how do I deal with my insecure boss, or how, there's many searchable, and the link on there comes right into my email inbox if anybody has any questions.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for always being nice.
Well, this was very nice, and I thank you so much, Dave.
Thanks for listening to the Nice Podcast. Theme music provided by Alistair Crystal at alistaircrystal.ca. Hey, if you enjoyed the conversation, please take a moment to leave us a review. The links are in the description. I'll have more of that soon. Did you know that new subscribers of the Nice Maker email newsletter receive a free copy of my little ebook, Improve with Improv? Each Friday, I share nice stories, tools, tips, and much more, and you can grab it now from nicemaker.co or by clicking the link in the episode description. I'm Dave Delaney. Take care and be nice. You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Sarah Panous hosts a great podcast called Marketing with Empathy. Sarah, tell us what these fine folks will get when they listen.
Marketing with Empathy is a weekly podcast, and it's designed for brand content marketers who want to connect with their audiences through storytelling and are looking for help to do it better, plus enjoy that recognition, growth, and just joy that comes from creating great work.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
Yeah, head on over to marketingpodcast.net and you will see the Marketing with Empathy show there. Otherwise, wherever you listen to podcasts, you'll find Marketing with Empathy.
You heard her. Go subscribe.